What I thought when I was 18 is the #1 trend on Twitter. So I scrolled down to take a look at what people were saying, and I'm not really surprised, but I'm not very impressed. And I thought I would take some time to talk about myself at 18 years old and what I thought and how that worldview was formed. Sorry about that. To start, when I was 18 years old, or when I turned 18, the school had make sure that all the students register to vote. I actually think it's a law that you have to register to vote, at least in New York State, when you turn 18 years old. And naturally, I registered as a Democrat. I was my history teacher's favorite student my senior year of high school. He said that I was oozing with potential, that he hoped that I had a career in politics. I wonder what he would think if he saw me now. When I think back about my education, it was a lot of one-sided arguments. Specifically, one-sided arguments on morality. And I was taught all through primary school, all through my formative years, that altruism is the highest form of virtue. To put society, to put the collective before oneself. And this was justified through discussions on welfare, public housing, food stamps, healthcare, social security. And of course the argument would always go something like, what would happen if the government wasn't in place to take care of these things? People wouldn't have enough money to live. People would literally die in the streets. People wouldn't be able to afford shelter. They would be homeless. As if the government has done much at all to prevent homelessness in America. Just look at how many American veterans are homeless to this day. That without food stamps, people would starve to death, and of course, the children. As if the American people aren't the most charitable people in the world. That without government health care, people would die. They wouldn't be able to get medical attention, and how inhumane is that? That you would be against giving the government the ability to take care of sick people who would otherwise not be able to get care. As if that type of thing couldn't happen through charity, or as if the government itself isn't the reason for the high cost of healthcare, as if the government isn't the reason that people can't afford healthcare in the first place. That the government doesn't partner with the big pharmaceutical industries and use regulations to create barriers to entry so that there's very little competition. And with any business, when there's not competition, the prices are going to get jacked up. Look at illicit drugs would be a great example. If the federal government takes down a big drug cartel, right? Well, usually what happens with that is it creates a shortage of drugs in one area, and whichever drug dealer has the drugs, they just drive up the price of those drugs. What do you think? What do you think? Because it's legal drugs versus illegal drugs, it's any different? Of course it's not. The government uses regulations and they create barriers to entry, which essentially gives big pharmaceutical companies, healthcare companies, a monopoly. And they don't allow Americans to buy drugs that are sold from other countries. So the same drug, which might be cheaper in another country, the price in America is jacked all the way up. Yet you can't just buy that the same exact drug, for a lower price from another country. Government is the reason people can't afford health care. But of course, when you're in school, they teach you, no. With government's the only reason people have healthcare, and without it, everyone would just die of sickness. That without government, elderly people would die. That how would they be able to afford to live, especially with people living longer these days? As if people aren't smart enough to save their own money. As if the government didn't take away large amounts of money every single paycheck you get your entire life, that you aren't smart enough to, instead of give that money to the government through a Ponzi scheme, because they don't even save the money, they use it on other things, which is why Social Security is eventually going to go bankrupt, which will crash the entire economy. But as if we're not smart enough to save our own money and plan for our own future. But people can't do that in today's society because so much of their money is taken through Social Security, Medicaid taxes, Medicare taxes, property taxes, taxation in general, that most Americans, I mean, the large majority of Americans don't have $500 in a savings account, let alone $10,000. And all of that is the result of government taking people's money in the name of altruism. But of course, when you're in the school system, when you're young, they just say, well, if the government wasn't here to do this, then all of these people, they would starve to death, they'd be homeless, they wouldn't have health care, they would die, and even if they got old, they would have no money to live. So the only moral answer is, of course, altruism. To give the government the authority to do these things. And then you get arguments about all the good things government does for society, and they have you read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, and they talk about fire departments and police departments. It's kind of ironic that they praise Upton Sinclair when school districts all around the country, or teachers unions all around the country, criticized Project Veritas for their recent undercover videos in which they exposed the corruption of teachers unions. I mean, basically the teachers unions were caught on undercover tape lying to make children who are victims of violence by teachers appear to be the aggressors, lying to protect teachers who had sexually abused their students. James O'Keefe is probably the greatest muckraker of our day, the greatest undercover journalist of our day. He is the Upton Sinclair, yet they condemn him. But they'll have you read Upton Sinclair, read The Jungle, where he exposed how dangerous the food industry was. And then they'll say, you see, what would we do without government if the government wasn't here to regulate the food industry? Of course, any rational person knows that once a problem is identified, you could take action in a free society. I mean, if the government didn't regulate the food industry, which, by the way, do you think they do a good job of that? Just look at the ingredients in Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Many of these ingredients, they're known to cause cancer. FDA approved. Food doesn't even have to be organic to get the organic stamp of approval. Society has very little knowledge about GMOs and the dangers of GMOs. The food regulators, the FDA in America, they don't look out for the people. They are protecting the food industries who buy them off. But they'll teach you in school because you're young and you don't understand the world, and they just present one side and they say, well, you see, Upton Sinclair, The Jungle, without the government you would be eating rats. Well, I think without the government there would be an industry through capitalism, and businesses would emerge as food raiders, and maybe it would be done through subscriptions. Maybe the food companies would, have to hire them because people won't eat any food without, a stamp of approval that the food's been checked and it's safe. I don't know what the model would be. That's the beautiful thing about freedom. I would certainly pay like a Netflix model, $10 a month to a company who reaches out to businesses, asks if they can check the food safety. And of course the businesses would want this. If they're a good business, they would want a private firm to give them a stamp of approval that their food is made with the ingredients they say it's made with. These businesses would volunteer for regulation because, well, I personally wouldn't eat food from any business that wasn't regulated in this manner. But it doesn't mean the government has to do it. But of course, you only get one side of the argument when you're in school. But what about the fire departments? Well, what about them? There's volunteer fire departments all over the country. Do you know, in Ben Franklin's autobiography, he talks about the fire department that he started. And it wasn't paid for through taxation. He started a fire department lottery, and every month he would go around. It was a 50-50 lottery, and he would sell it as, one, we get a town fire department, so even if you lose the lottery, it's a win-win because it's paying for your safety. And two, it's a 50-50 lottery, so hey, you might win a lot of money if you get involved. And sure enough, Ben Franklin was able to fund his fire department that way. There are so many creative ways to do things, but you're not taught that in school. Well, certainly police departments. Do you not think that we have a problem with police brutality in the United States of America? Especially, come on, if you're a leftist, people that generally support these big government policies, right? All we ever hear from the left is that police are brutalizing African Americans. You don't think there's any other way to handle police work? When the country was founded, there was a Second Amendment, and everyone had the right to bear arms. What if there was just a culture change? What if everyone had guns? Do you think women would be nearly as vulnerable to domestic violence if they had a gun? The reason women are vulnerable to rape and domestic violence is because men are physically able to dominate. If you're a man, you could, unless you're a soy boy, you could physically dominate a woman. Well, that is unless that woman has a gun. The physical dominance no longer matters. A little change in culture, and just let people have guns. With that type of change in culture, people would probably take personal responsibility. I know for me, I would happily join an unofficial state militia. What if every person, when they turned, whatever it is, 15, 18 years old, they got their gun and they joined their local state militia, and they trained with their firearm, and they became a band of brothers and sisters who trained together and prepared together? You'd probably be a lot safer, wouldn't you? If there were any trouble, just call the militia and they could break it up. And since everyone would be involved, they're your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, can that not work? There are so many systems that could work outside of government, but when you're in school, you're taught that government is the end-all be-all, that government performs functions, and if it doesn't, those functions can't take place. We're taught that capitalism is very bad. The capitalists are bad. That somehow capitalism, which really all capitalism means is freedom. It's property rights. It's the ability to own property, the ability to own goods, so, whatever it might be. You can make candlesticks and sell them. You can make candles and sell them. And the ability to own your own services, so you can agree to work for someone else, you could agree to work in their factory, you can agree to be a masseuse, give people massages. And everything about it is voluntary. And if you don't want to work for someone, if you don't like them as a boss, well, you just don't work for them. And if you have a good and you want to sell it to someone and they don't meet your demands of what you would want in return for the sale, then you don't sell it. And if someone has a product and you want it, you say, hey, I'll give you, we'll talk in dollars for now, I'll give you $10. Will you sell me that candlestick? No? All right, what about 12? Oh, okay. Well, that's a voluntary interaction. Are voluntary actions bad? Is freedom bad? Is freedom immoral? Because according to the school system, capitalism is immoral. Capitalism is bad. Freedom is thus immoral. We're taught about the robber barons and how bad they are and how the robber barons represent capitalism. And good thing Teddy Roosevelt came along and he was the trust buster. But what they don't teach us is that the robber barons, which they claim the government regulates, the robber barons are the government. We're taught that we need government to regulate bad corporations who are going to hurt society, but the truth is, the robber barons, the big corporate titans, why do you think they spend all of that money on political campaigns? They give all that money to super PACs. They give all that money to politicians. They spend so much time, invest so much effort getting politicians elected. They spend billions of dollars on lobbyists. They don't do that because government regulates corporations. They do that because they know that the big oligarchs, the robber barons, the corporations, they buy the government, they become the government, and they use government to regulate competition out of society so that business, capitalism, is only there in name, it's no longer there in practice. Yet we're taught that the government is supposed to protect us or is the one protecting us, when in reality, government is the very robber barons that we're told we're being protected from. Now, they don't teach you that in school. They just say that we need government to protect you from these robber barons. They don't teach you that in the 1900s, early 1900s. We know from the Reese Committee that the Rockefellers, these big robber barons, right? The Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Ford Foundation, J.P. Morgan, they got together and they figured out that they could hijack the American education system through the leveraging of grants. Very simple. If your school teaches this curriculum and adopts this teaching format, which was based off of the Prussian education system, which was put together by psychologists in Prussia, the government wanted them to formulate a system that would make people subservient to the government, subservient to authority, outsource their thinking to authority. And that's the system the robber barons used. The system the robber barons had implemented all throughout the country, just through leveraging grants. It's not really that hard to do. Dangle a little bit of the golden carrot. 10 grand, teach this curriculum, use this format. Done. The teachers applauded it. The parents applauded it. And now, of course, we have the teachers' unions. And the education system has become... The education system, and again, the unions made possible by government. And, of course, the teachers who are teaching all of this stuff, they're in these unions. But the unions... now they are just a multi-billion-dollar money laundering scheme, and the unions coerce money out of their employees, and they donate billions and billions of dollars, or millions and millions of dollars to politicians, and the politicians get rich and they make millions of dollars and they keep power and get reelected, and the teachers unions, they keep getting billions of dollars, and a lot of people are getting very rich off of that, and the price of that is the minds of our children. American education system. that those same robber barons, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, that in 1913 they hijacked the American banking system, the Federal Reserve. It's a corporate government partnership with the big oligarchs at the top. That the banking system serves these oligarchs. They don't teach you that government, in its simplest definition, is just a monopoly over the use of force. It's giving a group of people who we're calling government the ability to initiate force against other people that, if anyone else initiated that type of force, we would say it's terrible. I mean, imagine if someone's smoking marijuana. And by the way, we could do this with worse drugs. You have to break out of your cultural norms. If someone is doing cocaine and they're not bothering anyone, you might not agree with it. I certainly don't think you should do cocaine. But imagine if someone's just doing cocaine at their house, you find out about it, you kick in their door, walk into their house, punch them in the face, put them in handcuffs, lock them in a cage because you don't like what they're doing. I think we would all say you can't do that. But the government could do it because, well, because they're the government. A government's just a monopoly over the use of force. In fact, the only difference between the government and organized crime, the government and the mafia, is the government has a 15 to 20 year education program designed to convince you that the government is looking out for your best interest. Designed to convince you that government is moral. And the government uses that monopoly over the use of force through federal taxation. And I know someone I respect greatly who comments on my videos a lot. I have great respect for him. Brilliant man. He talks a lot about how, well, federal taxation is not force because you sign a contract with the government when you fill out your W-2, when you fill out your IRS forms. Well, I would argue that a contract has no validity if you are getting people to sign it through fraud or coercion. I mean, if me and someone else, any random person in society, signed a contract for whatever it might be, maybe if we signed a contract and you know, I told them that I would be selling them, I'm just throwing something out there, my car, and they agree to buy the car and they give me $25,000, and then I throw a little wink wink and I send them a toy car in the mail, and then I say, no, you can't have your money back. Well, that contract will be done through fraud. It's not valid. Coercion. I mean, whether or not the government has the authority to, the legal authority, technically, to arrest someone for not paying taxes if they don't sign that contract, the coercion is so implied in our society that the gun is implied. You pay your taxes or we're going to come get you and you'll go to jail. And even if you say, oh, well, you could fight that legally, right? Well, how much money is it going to cost you to fight back against the government's force? Because you have to fight the IRS. So that's coercion. I mean, if me and someone else signed a contract and in the middle of the negotiation I didn't like what they had to say and I just put a gun on the table and told them that it would be in their best interest to sign the contract right now. I didn't point it at them, just put it on the table. And they signed the contract. Well, that contract doesn't have any validity. The government uses its monopoly over force to enforce taxation. And of course, they try to justify this through their altruism, their welfare programs, their public housing, their food stamps, health care, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. This is moral. This is what they tell you. This is moral that they're doing that. But of course, as I stated, these big robber barons who the education system teaches us oh, don't worry, the robber barons, the government's reining them in, protecting us from them. In fact, the very robber barons they use as the example, right? The Rockefellers are the ones who hijacked America's banking system, the Federal Reserve. And every dollar in taxation, that the government collects, especially with the programs that, you know, they claim we need to take on more debt for. So like the Social Security programs and all of these programs, healthcare, whatever it might be, especially their war programs. But all of these programs in which they use, and public pensions, of course, they use to justify the taking on of more debt. Well, that debt, the government gets charged interest for the money that comes from the Federal Reserve Bank that they create out of nothing, mind you. And that interest, who's getting it? Is it those robber barons? They don't teach that in school, do they? No, they teach that altruism is morality. But altruism is not morality. Altruism is used to justify the government using a monopoly over the use of force against people who just wish to be free. And because the government is initiating force against the civilian population to enact their altruism, then altruism can only take place via the initiation of force. Now, like my drug example, if I just went up to someone in the street and took out a gun and said, "Give me your wallet," and they gave me their wallet, well, we would all say that's immoral, that initiation of force. Well, if that's immoral, then the government's version of altruism, where they take your money through force, fraud, and coercion to pay for their welfare programs, then altruism can only be defined as immoral. The exact opposite of what we are taught in school. Isn't that something? They teach you that greed is immoral. But under capitalism, if I am free, if I own my goods and I offer them on the market and you agree to buy them, then no force is used. If I start a business and I offer you money, you could choose to work for me, you could choose not to work for me. The interaction is completely voluntary. Therefore, there's no use of force, and it's a completely moral interaction. If I offer you a service, if I offer someone a back massage, if whatever that service may be, if I offer to teach someone's child, tutor someone's child, teach them history, well, I set my price, they agree to pay it. This is a voluntary action. This is completely moral. There is no use of force involved. You could say, I'm greedy. Someone said that I was greedy because I made my Tommy Robinson shirts and sold them for profit. I'm completely unapologetic. Greed is not immoral. Greed is a virtue. My interaction is completely voluntary. I offer a shirt for sale. I paid someone to help me design and make the shirt. A completely voluntary interaction in which they only did because, not because they wanted to help me, I'm sure they did, but they offered to help design that shirt and produce that shirt for me out of greed, out of self-interest. But it was a voluntary interaction between me and myself, just like when I sell my Tommy Robinson shirt. That's a voluntary interaction between me and whoever decides to buy that shirt. Greed is, by that definition, a virtue because it doesn't involve the initiation of force. They say that capitalism is immoral when capitalism is moral. It's altruism that is immoral. They say that capitalism is immoral because it creates inequality. Well, should we use force to create equality? Is that more moral than a voluntary system that creates inequality? You have a very twisted view of what morality is, if that's the case. The truth is, capitalism does create inequality through voluntary interactions because some people have skills that other people don't have. And yes, some people start from a better position than other people. Although, if you just research this, 50% of people who come from wealth within 2 generations, that family's broke. The mobility within the American system is actually, it's very strong. And that's a quasi-capitalistic system. But the truth about capitalism, not that we live in it, but even we have a twisted form of it. The truth is that it doesn't matter if it creates inequality, because what it has proven to do is raise the floor of poverty. Because through people pursuing their self-interest, there has been amazing human innovations. Whether that's the ability to travel, whether that's trains, whether that's Henry Ford with his cars, whether that's Tesla, and then, well, he might have done it for the good. He might have actually been trying to do it for society, but again, he did it through voluntary means. He wasn't trying to impose force on anyone. But Thomas Edison and J.P. Morgan's interest in the light bulb, and don't get me wrong, some of these people, they used government to gain advantages in these cases. Government was able to enact the use of force, and that's why it becomes immoral. But whether it's Ford through his cars, whether it's the Wright brothers and airplanes, whether it is whatever it is, with every invention, whether it's Steve Jobs and the little phone I'm talking to you on right now, whether it's Bill Gates and Microsoft, or the spread of the internet on a mass scale, greed leads to people to pursue their own American dream, their own self-interest, and in doing so, that creates innovation. And that's why you see in capitalistic societies, you have all of these toys. You tweet on your cell phone how much you hate capitalism. That's so ironic. You know, Twitter was created to make money. Just like your cell phone is in your hand by people who are pursuing greed. But what that greed does is, and again, through voluntary means, is it makes things available that otherwise wouldn't be available to other people. So whereas 150 years ago, if you were poor, if you were in poverty, you might not have had much. If you're in poverty today, you let capitalism take its path. You have an apartment, you have a car, you have a cell phone. You could go to a grocery store, by the way. You want to talk about what greed does. All the food you see in grocery stores, or you go to your local farmer's market, that's able to get to the shelf through the miracle of the measuring stick created by supply and demand. People have enough information because of supply and demand, because of price, all the information that comes with that, that every week companies are able to manage the logistics of shipping food across the country and getting it on the shelves of grocery stores. That's why you see countries like Venezuela and North Korea, these controlled, centralized societies. They don't have the measurement mechanism of voluntarism, supply and demand, and price. So they're not able to get food on the shelves, and that's why people in socialist societies starve, and people in capitalist societies, I mean, if you're poor in a communist society, a socialist society, you eat, in Venezuela, they kill and eat zoo animals because they have nothing to eat. If you're in poverty in the United States of America, you die of a heart attack at age 50 from eating so many Big Macs. Now, there's a lot of problems with what I described, right? Monsanto, how the big food companies, the biotech companies, they dominate the grocery stores, and the reason they're able to do that, again, is because people have been taught to worship government. People who vote for big government policies give these big oligarchs, these robber barons, the authority through their purchasing of government to regulate capitalism out of society. All you have to do is go against what you're taught in the school system, and you take away the power of these big robber barons that the school system tells you the government is actually regulating. So capitalism raises the floor of what poverty is. And it also creates upward mobility. Because you could be poor, but if you have a good head on your shoulders, if you could just figure out a product other people want or a service other people want. I don't do it right now, but I can make a ton of money offering a service as to offer to teach people history. Shit, I'll just play them a few of my videos. So, upward mobility is made possible because of greed, because of people pursuing their self-interest under a system of freedom that is capitalism. The pursuit of self-interest in a free system creates prosperity. The pursuit of people to promote the collective by giving government authority always leads to poverty and death. And that's why you see under all systems, whether it's communism, whether it's fascism, giving the government more authority means the taking away of freedom, which is what capitalism really is, the taking away of property rights. So what happens under communism, for example, when the government comes along and says, we're going to confiscate your property? Well, you could let them confiscate your property, but now you're poor and your liberty has been taken away. You could fight back against the government, but now they're going to lock you in a jail cell and take away all your freedom. Or you could pick up arms and really fight back against the government, but that's going to end up with you being killed. Again, it is the promotion of the collective in the name of altruism that is immoral. And it is the promotion of the individual and freedom, the name of capitalism, that is a moral system. But you are taught the exact opposite in the education system. It is overwhelming, or I should say, the percentage of young people who graduate the government's education system believing that altruism is morality and capitalism is immorality is overwhelming. The percentage of people who come out of the government education system, who are devout leftists, who vote for bigger and bigger government because they believe the government is protecting them against corporations, is overwhelming. And that is not a coincidence when you give the government the authority, the privilege, the right to take control of the minds of your children. Is it any shock that the government teaches that freedom is against your best interest and giving the government more authority is within your best interest? This is all by design. When I was 18 years old, I was completely brainwashed by the government's education system. But when I got older, I began to understand how the world works. And every day that we do not kick and scream about the government controlling our education system, the government controlling the minds of our children, is a day that our society becomes a worse and worse and worse, a less free, and a much more dangerous place. We need to make educational reform in the United States of America not a top priority, but the top priority. Because our future, the future of our children, the future of our grandchildren, the future of freedom and liberty and prosperity and everything we hold dear relies on the issue of education. Thank you so much for watching this presentation. I hope that if you are 18 years old, this may help spur an awakening in you. As soon as I woke up, I made it my life goal to wake up as many minds as I could. I really appreciate you tuning in. Anyone who supports this message and wants to help empower me, you can do so for as little as $1 monthly at www.patreon.com/FFRnews. Please follow me on my other social media. I'm Tom FFR News on BitChute, Tom Anderson on Gab, Tom FFR News on Twitter. Thanks, guys. I hope you're smarter than me, than I was when I was 18.